Hi everyone, Jason with Happy Tales. Before we get to today's video, we filmed this whole thing step by step, and as we were putting it together we realized about 3/4 of it had no sound. A lot of that had to do with myself recording it as Beth was away, and I just didn't catch that it was not recording sound, so we had to kind of dub over it. I apologize. You'll notice that obviously what I'm saying and what my lips are saying are two totally different things, so if you can bear with it, there's some good information there, but again, sometimes stuff happens. So without further ado, check it out. Hi everyone, it's Jason with Happy Tales. Well, today started out normally, as normal can be, I guess. We had talked a little bit ago about well, I'll just cut to the chase. Putting some new sneakers on. Well, we pulled this side off and everything came off fine. We went to the other side and, well, a little different story over there. We'll kind of bring you over here and we'll show you what we ran into. When we pulled the tires off, now, mind you, I put bags on here to keep the dust and everything out, but I'll insert this little video right here of what we found. Well, we pulled these tires off on the street side, and both of these caps were inside the center cap of the wheel. So these are both broken off. I can take and spin these off like so. So that's not the issue, and I can get some new caps. What I'm worried about is how much material got in there. Granted, it was sealed with the wheel, but a lot of stuff got in here, I'm sure, dust-wise. So what we're going to do is we will pull these wheels off, we'll pull this pin off, we'll pull this castle nut off, and then the bearing and the whole hub will come off. We'll look at the bearings, see if there's any abnormal wear on the bearings, and if they are, we'll replace them. And the races, we're at this point, it doesn't take much to do it, and so we'll show you what we're going to do there. So, kind of a good thing that we decided to put new tires on. Now, we didn't need tires. We've had really good luck. I even hate to say this, but we've had really good luck with these Westlake tires. We've gone back and forth across the country several times, and I think key to that is just paying attention and having a good TPMS. But we were approaching that DOT code. The tires were 5 years old, and I figured it was time to sell them, or excuse me, to trade them off and get new tires. So we went with Cooper's, and I'll show you what we got here. So these are the tires that we went with. They are Cooper tire. They are their Work Series. It is a 16 ply sidewall. We had these Coopers on our Solitude, and we loved them. They rode really well. They didn't wear in unevenly, held their pressure. They were just a really good solid tire, so that's what worked for us. I'll link them down in the description there so you guys can see. But now on to the bigger elephant. And it's not really that big of a deal, because when I had the tires off, I was originally going to repack the bearings anyway, so this kind of forced my hand, but like I said, I was going to do it anyway. So what we're going to do is kind of show you how to inspect your bearings, how to repack them, what we use and what works for us, and kind of do a step-by-step on that. Since we're going to be there anyway, might as well show you what to do. All right, let's go check it out and dig in, get our hands dirty. All right, well, here we go. This is the dubbed over that we talked about a little bit earlier. We're going to show you kind of the few tools that we recommend. This one here is a bearing packer. We use a Milwaukee grease gun. The reason that we choose the Milwaukee is, well, all of our tools are pretty much Milwaukee, and to be honest, we got tired of using a hand pump back and forth. So with this Milwaukee, it's very nice. We can hit the suspension grease points. There's 7 across the lower suspension here. And the nice thing about that Milwaukee grease gun as well is we can set a dial to it, and it'll put exactly, 3 pumps, 6 pumps, what have you in there. The other thing we'll need is a box of rags, as you saw me point out there, that it's a messy job. You're going to want to have, plenty of rags to go around. The reason that I taped this all up was just to keep debris out and dust out before we worked into it. Now you'll see here's that center cap off the wheel, and as you can see, it was full of grease, and both of those caps were like that. So the new caps I just showed you there, clear cap, but other than that they're identical. The old caps were smoked in color, and these new caps, they are clear, and it should make it a little easier to see. So we're going to kind of open this guy up here. We're going to show you a little better look on the inside. So one thing that concerned me is there is not a lot of grease in there. There should be much more grease. Obviously, a lot of it was in that center cap. You can see that there's a grease zert here in the middle. I'll kind of get into that here in a little bit. Those are kind of a devil's thorn. They're designed to grease the inner bearing. A lot of people put too much grease into them, and what happens is there's a seal on the back of that drum, and you'll blow out that seal if you pump too much grease in there. In turn, you will end up grease soaking all of your pads. So it can be a bad situation. We usually recommend about 10 pumps of grease. As long as your bearing is packed good, 10 is way sufficient to get you by. So we're going to kind of show you the bearing packer again, apparently, and that goes back to packing your bearing. And I'll show you later in the video on 2 different ways to pack a bearing. To be honest with you, I kind of prefer doing your hand method, and like I said, we'll go into that here shortly. But what we're going to do here is we will show you how to pull this all apart. First, you're going to need a pair of side cutters, and there's a cotter pin. The cotter pin is kind of at like a 12 and a 4 o'clock. It's not straight up and down. It usually goes through one, skips one, and then goes through another one, and then it's bent up. So you'll want to bend it down, and I found that the side cutters work very well for this. Excuse me, as I apparently wasn't prepared, and I'm having to get some more towels out to have a nice clean work surface. But we're going to clean up as much as we can off of here, and then we're going to use those side cutters, and we're going to bend the tab back down, and we will take this crescent wrench. Sometimes you have to move that castle nut just a little bit to be able to get to that cotter pin, which you can see is exactly what I had to do. Then you just bend it down and apparently use it as a hammer. But hey, it's not stupid if it works. We will bend this guy down. There's going to be 2 legs that will bend down. I believe, if I remember right on this one of them was already broken off. So we actually only bent one down, and then we grabbed the end of it and pulled it out. Now we'll grab our crescent wrench, and there is not a lot of pressure on this castle nut. It is about 10 to 18 foot-pounds. Not a lot of pressure at all. Remember that when you're putting them back. So we'll pull this apart, and we're going to pull that castle nut out. And behind that castle nut is a pretty good size washer. It kind of holds that bearing in place. And we will, once again, clean up. And we're going to pull this bearing out. And we're going to inspect this bearing. We were a little suspect that the bearing might have gotten a little hot. So what we're looking for is we're going to be looking for, as well as smelling, believe it or not, whether or not this thing smells burnt. If the grease smells burnt, we're going to look for discoloration on the bearing itself. As you can see, the bearing actually looks pretty good. It was light on the grease, which again we were kind of worried about, but we did not see any scoring. We didn't see any discoloration. So all in all, the bearing looked really well. So we're going to put this down to the side. There I am smelling it to make sure it's not burnt. And then we will clean it here in the future and pack it down and reinstall it. We're also going to look at the race. That's what the bearing sits into inside of that hub. We're going to pull this off. Now this part here, this can either go really easy or it can go really stiffly and awkwardly. It depends on how your brakes are set. If your brakes are adjusted properly, you should fight with this hub a little bit to get it off. If it comes right off, your brakes are not adjusted properly. So that's a little tidbit for you to kind of know. If it comes right off, it just pulls right off, then you need to adjust your brakes. Alright, so we've got it off. We're going to set it down. We have a mat here that you can't quite see that we're laying it down on. This surface obviously is a gravel surface, so keep that in mind. If you're going to do this on a gravel surface, you need to lay it on a clean pad so that you can keep it clean. You don't want any dirt getting in there, because if you don't get it out, that's just going to mar up your race. Here's your magnet for your brakes. This is how your trailer brakes work. That magnet engages as you push into your brake pedal. That's why it's called electric trailer brakes. If you're lucky to have hydraulic disc, then you're lucky. You don't need to worry about this step. What I just showed you was the little clip. Now, later in the video, we'll talk about it. The clip broke off and how we were able to get by. Now you can see how this race is all kind of grease soaked. It goes back to that zert that I was telling you about. Somebody, the prior owner or maybe even the service shop, put too much grease in there and it started coming out past the grease seal, the dust seal on the back. Now behind that is a internal bearing. So there's 2 bearings per spindle per side of your axle here. So basically I'm just cleaning it up. I'm going to take a look at the dust seal, make sure that it's not dry rotted. It shouldn't be with all that grease. And make sure that the spring on the inside is still good, and which it was. And if you go to check your internal bearing, you're going to have to replace this race, because the only way to get that bearing out is to pop it through that seal. So seals aren't that much. It's good practice to replace as you go through this. You'll see that we have in the background a can of brake clean. You'll probably go through about a can per drum. So obviously 2-axle trailer, you'll want about 4 to 5 cans of brake clean. You just want everything clean, especially if you have a trailer new to you and this is the first time you're doing this. You're going to want to make sure that somebody else didn't blow through those dust seal on that hub and grease soak your pads or your shoes in this instant. You can see right where I'm pointing at, that's where that grease comes out. That grease comes out from that zert and goes to the inside here, and kind of in that valley, it'll just fill that valley up, and that's designed to grease the internal bearing. Sorry, had a brain fart there. It'll also grease from the inside to your inner part of your outer bearing. But here you can kind of see where I'm showing how the that little valley in there is where all that grease collects. So you literally can put too much grease to that. Alright, so we're going to kind of get readjusted here. You can see the hand packer there. We just going to go through here. We're going to clean up this spindle really nice. Make sure there's no scoring again. Make sure there's no discoloration. It will be covered in grease, so that's kind of what we're going through. We're just doing some due diligence of cleaning this guy off. You'll see me here spray it with some brake clean. We'll clean off the whole entire spindle. Alright, so here we are cleaning off the spindle, as I said, but what we're really doing is trying to have a nice surface for that bearing to ride on. This is where that inner bearing is going to ride. So we're just making sure that it doesn't have any gouges in it and that it's nice and clean. There was a lot of debris on there. By debris, I mean there was a lot dried grease. So we just really took our time, cleaned it off, and made sure that it didn't have any gouges in it. Okay, so we're going to kind of spray down this whole internal part of our braking system. Again, you'll notice that we talked about the dust seal and how the grease had gone out around that. Once it gets out of that, it makes a mess. So while you've got this apart, it's good practice to just spray everything down. Use nice can of brake clean. It's going to get dirty. I do have towels underneath there where a lot of this is going to drip into. It's not dripping into the ground, so not to worry, people. But we will go through. We are going to clean off this magnet really good. Also, this one wasn't so bad, but the same axle on the curb side was really bad. That one had blown out, and that one, the brakes were actually oil soaked. So, again, just good practice. You're going to go through a lot of shop towels. Just get any and all grease that is not where it's supposed to be out of there. You want to have a nice clean surface, and then even like I said on that spindle, it'll be nice and clean for when we get that new grease on there. Everything is just going to work a lot better. Okay, so we are now cleaning the bearing. We sprayed it down with brake clean. Ideally, solvent would be the best way to go if you have a solvent tank, or you can even buy it's like a portable solvent tank. It's a little gallon drum. It's parts cleaner that you can soak this stuff into. But be honest, brake clean works pretty darn good. So we are cleaning off my hand, and what we're going to do is we're going to put a dollop of grease on there, and I'm going to kind of show you how to pack a bearing by hand. And I'll be honest, this is the best way to do it because you will get the grease in every little crevice that it needs to, unlike the bearing packer. The bearing packer works fine, but it just definitely does not get as much grease into it as this process does. So, as you see, Beth is back. She is going to squirt my hand full of grease. There we go. And now all we do is we go at about a 45-degree angle, and we're just going to kind of knead it in there. You just kind of back and forth, and you're just kind of pushing it through there. And you can see it doesn't take much, and it comes right in. You just got to keep a big old glob of grease in your hand and keep rotating your bearing around and until you get it all working through. So you start from the small end to the big end, and all that grease is going to go behind those bearings in the cage that the bearings rest in. And you can see there that we have a good third of the bearing packed that quick. Now what we're going to do is we're going to show you the I guess mechanical way. So what we do is you fill that up. It's got a little greaser on the top there of that stem, and you just fill up the bottom reservoir with grease, and then you take, here I'm showing you where the zert is, and then you take that cone that Beth has in her hand, you're going to put it in the middle. That's going to taper that bearing down. You don't thread it, it just pushes down. I'm going to get the residual grease that I have on my hand off. And then kind of a similar aspect, you kind of work that plunger around, and you'll see where the grease will come up through that. You can see how I'm kind of working it in a circle as well as applying pressure. And it does take quite a bit of pressure, but it's definitely cleaner. Now you can see how it's come up that way. Now it is coming through the cage like it's supposed to. It's just again, it's a personal preference. I don't think you get as much coverage with grease doing it this way, but it is sufficient. It will work. I'll pull it off there, and you can see where I packed originally, up from like 11 to 1 o'clock on that, and then where the bearing packer comes in. You can see a vast difference. That's why I like doing it the old school way. So we're just going to keep kind of working this guy around a little bit, making sure that we get good coverage all the way around. Like I said, just be patient. You're just working that grease up through a couple little holes that force it up through there. So then what we'll do is we'll pull the bearing out, and we'll take all the excess grease that we have all around the bearing, and we're not going to get rid of it. What we're going to do is we're going to work it back into that bearing. So we're going to work it down around the top of that bearing, between the cage that the bearings sit in and the inner race. As you can see here, I'm just working it all the way around. You can't have enough grease on these things. Grease is your fun. I know I said fun. Grease is your friend when it comes to packing the bearing. I know earlier I said that you don't want to have a lot of grease on the inside because you'll blow out the dust seal. But when you're packing the bearing, just make sure that it is covered in grease. This is your one and only time to really do your due diligence. All right, so we have repacked the outer bearing. We've repacked the inner bearing. Now we're just going to spray everything down real quick. Make sure that all the surfaces are clean. There's no grime or dust. Make sure those brake pads have been cleaned off. Make sure there's no grease in them, on them, from touching them with your hands. You name it. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to kind of show you the back of the drum, the inside of the drum. It's all clean. We've new seal on it. The new bearings are in there. We're just going to put everything back together now. And this is usually where you knock your noodle. It's trying to get in here. But as you can see here, the drum is all cleaned out. We have a new race in there. Our repack bearing is in there. And now we're just going to lift it up and put it on here. Now, here's a little tidbit for you. If you can adjust your brakes at this point, it makes your life a lot easier. You want it to bind up just a little bit trying to put it on. But again, just like I said, pulling it off, you don't want it to just flop in there. You want to have a little bit of resistance trying to get it to line up and slide in there. As you can see, I'm trying to work it back and forth. For me, they are just about perfect. I'm just kind of working that thing back and forth. And then she's just going to pop right in. Just like so. Now what you're going to do is you're going to grab your outer bearing that is nice and, well, apparently I can't find it because I left it in the I left it in the bearing packer so it wouldn't get dirt and grime on it. It's a good place to keep it. So you slide it in so it just goes right into the race that's there. Then you're going to take the washer, and basically you're going to reverse the step. You're going to take your washer, we're going to slide it on there, and then we're going to put our castle nut, and then we'll put a new cotter pin in. You can reuse the cotter pin, but come on folks, they're not that expensive, and I highly recommend just putting a new one in. So here goes our washer, and here's our castle nut. Now, you might be asking yourself, why do they call it a castle nut? Well, let me show you. It's because if you look at the side profile of this nut, it looks like walls of a castle. It's pretty simple. That's why they call it a castle nut. And those slots allow the cotter pin to slide through the hole that is on the spindle shaft. So again, you don't want to put a lot of pressure. You're not going to torque these things down. You'll actually cause more damage if you do torque them down past, I believe it was, like I said, 30 foot-pounds is the most. I think it's between 15 to 30 foot-pounds. Not a lot. I basically just tighten it down and then back it off until I can see those holes line up, and then I drop my cotter pin in there. So you can see here that we have our Milwaukee grease gun on the Zert, and we have our preset set to 10, and then we're just going to kind of spin it. As I'm spinning it, she is pumping grease in there. It's only going to give it about 10 shots. And then what we'll do is we'll pull it off, and then we will grease around the castle nut. I will put a couple, well actually I will cover that bearing face with grease before we put the cap on it. And that's just a good process. Nothing's going to come blasting out the cap or anything, and it just gives us some extra grease to protect those bearings, especially if they get hot, which tends to happen. So here I'm showing exactly where we're going to put that cotter pin in, and with our cap. There's our new cotter pin, and you can see here that it's not straight up and down. Like I said, it's offset, so sometimes you have to twist that nut just ever so much to make it line up properly. And this one just dropped right in. So then what we'll do is we will grab our side cutters again, and we're going to grab the bottom, and we're just going to bend it up. Now you want to try and keep it off that Zert so that you can get access to it, but it's not end of the world. And here are our new caps. You'll notice, remember in the beginning of the video, that they are broke. Comes with an O-ring. That O-ring is important to get back on there. And it comes with the access cap to get your greaser without having to pull that cap off. You can just pull that little plug off and shoot a couple Zerts in there if you feel that you need it. Nice thing about this one being clear, unlike the smoked ones that were on there, is now I can actually see my grease level. So see, I just screwed it on there. I'm pushing on that plug, making it sure it's got a nice seat on it. And you know, anything new rubber going into a tight hole like that, sometimes you struggle with it a little bit. And then we are just going to crank on these hand tight. Kind of the same torque that you're going to put on that castle, but not a lot, but you do want it to seat. You'll compress that O-ring just enough to where it'll stay in there. And I think it said on those about 10 to 20 foot-pounds of torque on the plastic. You don't want to do a lot, because if you do a lot, you're going to have the same thing. You're going to have a broken cap when you go to pull your wheel off. So I'm pretty sure that's exactly what happened. So we got one done. Now we've got 3 more. We're going to kind of rotate through and do the same steps over and over again until we get it right. And this time we won't have any grease in the center again. So that's all I had on these ones. Just follow the process. It's not that hard. It goes pretty easy. And this is something you really should do once a year, not just when you change your tires like we did. And like I said, we were going to do this anyway, so it wasn't that big of a deal. And we did go ahead and replace all 4 center caps on the hubs. Alrighty, so sorry that the audio's a little bad. The mics died coincidentally. I just wanted to show you real quick that in a pinch, you can use the little tiny zip ties in that hole to keep that magnet in place. Now it's not going to lock it in place permanently, but it will at least let you get the drum on, and that drum will hold that magnet in place because that spring presses against that anyway, and that magnet rolls against your inner drum. So if you find that that pin is broke, that little clip, that little zip tie will work in a pinch to get you by. We did that out in Virginia. boy, when was that? Back in August, September, I think. And still there. So it works in a pinch. So just wanted to show you that. So that's doing the repacking of the bearings and getting all the shoes. We'll show you what this guy looks like when we get our slippers back on, and then we'll do our conclusion. Alrighty. All right, so there you have. You see that we got the new slippers on, so to speak, and it really wasn't that tough of a job to do. We were planning on doing it anyway, so hopefully we showed you the steps of how to do it. Sorry, there's like a ton of mosquitoes under here. We've just had rain and rain and rain, so we're looking forward to getting this guy back on the road and seeing how these do. I've got full faith that they're going to do fantastic. The other key thing is don't forget about your spare. Your spare is going to be just as old as your tires, if not even a little older. So spend the money and do it right the first time instead of being on the road and being on a shoulder somewhere wishing that you had. So if you guys got any questions, shoot us up down in the comment section, and if not, we'll see you guys next week. Thanks again for watching, and it's always a pleasure. Bye-bye, everybody.